as well by becoming completely materialistic, so that we don't even believe that spirit exists. Spirit is some type of illusion that we have. There's nothing but random evolution over time through completely physical biological processes, and there is no spirit, there's nothing of that kind. So this becomes a kind of modern materialistic scientific perspective that's very sharp in some ways, but has absolutely no spiritual perception. And so for complete materialists, they fall completely into this pillar. And so we can see that type of dichotomy that's being created here and holding the balance between it, between spirituality and life in the world. Now the Ahrimanic aspect then took on other names and other times. The Gnostics referred to the being of Ahriman, or the beings of the same quality referred to as Ahrimanic beings, as the demiurge. So you read all these Gnostic texts about the demiurge, the dark lord of this earth that created the physical world. Has many different manifestations in the Gnostic text, and you can find variants on that in other traditions as well, like in South America. Then in Egypt, this polarity was referred to as Set, and Set was shown contrasted with Horus, and actually there would be an empowerment of the pharaoh by both Horus and Set when the pharaoh would take the throne. That term Set, when the Hebrew people left Egypt, led by Moses, who had been initiated in the Egyptian temples, that term Set became Ha-Satan, and so Set became Satan. Now Ha-Satan is a Hebrew term meaning the adversary, and so it means that this is a being that has an adversarial relationship to the human being. And so that's where we then got the concept in the West of Satan. Again, this is a dark type of being, very different from the Luciferic beings as beings of light. And so this has to be understood as a basis, number one, to study different esoteric traditions. Because, for example, if you study Theosophy, like the work of Madame Blavatsky, the Luciferic beings are actually the redeemers. Luciferic beings are actually our guides. Then in other texts, like the Rosicrucians, they say, no, the Luciferic beings have some spiritual wisdom, but we have to stay on that middle path. There's a different set of beings here. Now this idea of holding the balance between these two types of beings is something that plays out in everyday life. And it's a constant dynamic process for every human being. If we were to strip away the veil, we would see that these invisible Luciferic and Ahrimanic beings are influencing our consciousness at all times to go to one direction or the other, just as the beneficial beings are also connecting with us. And in the ancient temple science, it was understood that our connection to these beings was purely through resonance. When we think in a particular manner, when we feel in a particular manner, all of our thoughts, all of our feelings, all of our internal states have an energetic quality to them, and they will resonate like an antenna with qualities of the exact same type in the other worlds. So if we have a very negative materialistic thought, that will resonate us with the more Ahrimanic beings. If we get a type of emotional striving to have only ecstatic process in our life and is completely spiritual without ever having to do the dishes or wash the car, then that will connect us more to the Luciferic types of beings. And then, of course, things that are more of a grounded nature to the central pillar. Now, one illustration I'd like to give of this, of how this same teaching appears in multiple places, is that in the teachings of esoteric Christianity, they have a really remarkable depiction of it. And that is, if you look at any pictures of the crucifixion of Christ from medieval times, they show Christ crucified between two thieves. So there's actually three crosses, and Christ is in the center. And the three crosses are actually three pillars. And there's three different beings on three pillars, with the Christ on the center. And then toward one side, on the pillar toward one side, is a thief that is shown on the paintings as inclining his head toward the Christ. And that's actually connected to the Luciferic beings. And that's demonstrated with that thief basically saying to the second thief that you and I deserve our fate, but this man is blameless. And he asks Christ to take him with him into his Father's kingdom. Christ replies, you will be with me in my Father's kingdom tonight. Because the Luciferic beings are not really opposed to the Christic forces and things in the way that the Ha-Satanic beings, the Ahrimanic beings are. So when you see these medieval depictions, Christ is on the center, one thief is there with his head inclined toward the Christ, and the other thief has his head turned away. And that's the one that is referred to in the Gospel of John as rebuking and reviling the Christ. And because the whole spiritual quality is different here. And that's again a direct depiction of three different types of spiritual beings that one interacts with. Now, the problem that can come with this is that when it's stripped away from the original initiation, very straightforward context, then people can get very worked up about hindering beings and have very sensationalistic reactions to them. But it's something like if you were to be told that you have 10 billion germs on your skin right now, and you do, you have billions of germs on your skin right now, but if your biological landscape is healthy, it doesn't matter. You're going to be fine. So if you don't get all freaked out about it, it's just the way things are already working before you even knew about it. We're influenced by these types of beings all the time. We are like fish that live in an ocean that don't know there's any water. These beings are surrounding us all the time, and our boundaries are actually not solid. They move through us, our consciousness, our feeling life, all the time. So that's one of the first things that would be clarified on the Rosicrucian path, is understanding these different types of influences that we come into contact with all the time. Let me hold questions to the end if I could, please. So the next thing we want to look at is the structure of the human being. And so the human being can be nothing other than a microcosm of the macrocosm. We hear that a lot in a really abstract way. But what it really means is that the human being has to be constructed out of the manifest levels of the Godhead spread throughout the universe that take on all these different planes that we hear about. So, for instance, there are different levels of a human being. In the esoteric tradition, we'll talk about a human physical body. That's related to the earth itself. It's what in India, in Sanskrit, they refer to as the sheath made of food. That's the literal name in Sanskrit for the physical body, the sheath made of food, because we take in physical substance, we put it into a field of force that is the outline of our body, and then it fills it out with physical substance. So the physical body is of the same nature as the earth. We draw the substance from the earth, we give it back at death. Then we have the level of life energy, that's called chi, ki, prana in the east, or the etheric in the west, from the Greek term for life energy. They have other names in the Hebrew Kabbalah related to concepts like ruach, etc. But basically it's pure life force. This is like the life energy of the Godhead moving through the world. We take a small detachment of that life energy and individualize it to become our life body during our incarnation. It's related to the element of water in physical elements. In the Egyptian mysteries, they have these beautiful depictions of a particular spiritual being that has a function that is represented by how it's shown as being a ram-headed god. All of these animal-headed gods in Egypt, the animal is related to the function of the being. And so this ram-headed god called Khnum in the Egyptian mysteries is working with a potter's wheel, and he's sculpting these energetic bodies for human beings that are about to incarnate. And so it's part of this concept. What we would call chi, ki, prana, the etheric, was related to the body of the Ka in ancient Egypt. Then we have our consciousness body, which includes both our emotional and mental function. Sometimes this is referred to generally as the astral, or sometimes it's broken down to being the emotional and mental body, which can also be referred to as the lower and upper astral. But there are all just various ways to break it apart. But essentially it's the consciousness field of God that we bring into ourselves as an individualized astral body. And that emotion and mind aspect is related to the element of air as another crystallization of the same force, but now into concrete physical matter outside of us. And then our self-awareness, our I am presence, is related to fire. This is what the Rosicrucians refer to as the ego with a capital E. But it's important to understand that when they say that, they don't mean the ego of psychology. It's not your little ego. This is your I am presence. This is your divine spark of being self-aware. So that's the whole thing through the Jewish Kabbalistic mysteries of the burning bush, I am, the 7 I am sayings of the Christ in the Gospel of John, etc. It's all about that development of pure self-awareness. Why would it be linked to fire? Because that's the pure spark of the fire, the flame from the ocean of fire of the Godhead that we have inside of us. And so to understand this type of basic structure of the human being, that every part of ourselves is a detachment from part of the levels of God that make the levels of the world outside of us, that we individualize to become a self-aware separate being. So that's an absolutely fundamental part of understanding what being a microcosm of the macrocosm is. So then when we go through a process of initiation, initiation is really a process of becoming aware of who am I, why am I here, where do I come from, and how do I develop a process by which I can become more self-aware and accelerate my process of development. Now there's a very important thing that comes in